So we are glad to have you attend our learning session this morning. Welcome everybody. A few things. You will absolutely be receiving a copy of this presentation, and we want this to be interactive. Please ask questions as they come to mind. The more engagement, the better. I see people are still being added to the queue, but there's a Q&A button at the top for you to engage with any questions you have as we go through this. And again, welcome everyone. Our session is hosted by Quality Associates and Accessibility on Demand. My name is Doug Yates. I'm a consultant for QAI, and I'm focused on intelligent information management. And if the AOD team would be kind enough to introduce yourselves.
Sure. I'm Bobby Das. I am the chief architect of the AOD solution, and I'm accompanied by my colleague, RJ Booth, and he will let you know who he is.
Thanks, Bobby. Hi, everybody. My name's RJ or Robert Booth. I'm a senior analyst here with AOD, or Accessibility on Demand. Looking forward to today's session.
And one quick slide about Quality Associates. We are celebrating 40 years in digital transformation. Our areas of focus include digitization, compliance, automation, and records modernization. And we're part of the Intelligent Information Management Group within Konica Minolta Business Solutions. However, our topic today is 508 compliance, and I think you're going to find this quite interesting. During our session, we are covering three main objectives. We are going to be reviewing Section 508 requirements, what it means, and why this must and should be done, and candidly, why it's so important to so many. And then we're also going to talk about how AI enhances remediation. I think it's reasonable to be skeptical of AI's role in many areas, but we're going to showcase how this improves speed, scalability, and trustworthy and improved results. And then we're also going to be addressing how your organization can reduce costs and support practical strategies. So hopefully you'll find these topics to be of a benefit to you. Before we go into more detail, let's just talk about the current landscape, compliance landscape. Federal agencies already have ongoing 508 compliance requirements, and they have the goal of becoming completely paperless, which we know they're still working on based on some of the large digitization projects we're seeing. But at the end of the day, unless it's paper is digitized, unless there's metadata applied to your documents, it's simply not accessible. And that requirement very much exists at the Department of Justice. And what has really changed is it's been extended to state and local agencies. All state and local agencies have a DOJ mandate that was recently extended. It was supposed to start this April. The good news is that you have all the way till April of 2027 if your agency is responsible for 50,000 or more citizens. I think that's the good news. I think the important thing to be aware of is that this has a direct impact on your upcoming fiscal year. So it is going to require this fiscal year funds starting in July to solve this problem with the April deadline. And then for those of you that are joining that represent or part of healthcare organizations that fall under HHS, you also must adhere to Section 504. So if you see all those acronyms thrown out, they're essentially the same thing, and that has officially went into place. And one of the things that we're seeing out there is the IT groups started the process by modernizing the websites and the mobile apps, because that's also included in the legislation. So they started working on probably what was considered high priority. But as a next phase, I think they quickly realized all publicly shared documents are impacted. And so this is where we are today. And I think this is why you're seeing a lot of panic addressing this in a little bit of more of a panic basis. And then I think the one thing when I look at something that's a compliance related, is there any advantages to the organization for implementing this from a technology perspective? And I think the one advantage no one is talking about is this enhanced metadata supports modernization, such as searchability, dashboards, automation, and even AI readiness. And we'll keep going here. And I'll turn this over to RJ.
Thanks, Doug. So Doug kind of, walk through, I think, fantastically around like, well, why this is so relevant to you all right now as it relates to the landscape, the deadlines, and so on. But I want to spend these next kind of couple of minutes on like what is actually wrong with most of the PDFs probably sitting in your archives or your customer archives right now. Because every single one of these problems are really, if you have a remediation team or if you're taking this on yourself, these are the things that are kind of keeping you up when you start to look at your PDFs. And we kind of boil them down into 5 core reasons why your PDFs, aren't compliant or aren't accessible. And, the punchline really is that if you pull any document out of any PDF out of your archive, your customer's archive, and you open it, in Adobe, 90% of the time, you'll find at least one or often all 5 of these problems with your PDFs. So starting with the top 3, the first is unreadable scans. Basically, anything that came out of a scanner before 2015 is probably going to be image only. There's not going to be a text layer at all of that. So a screen reader hits it and it just returns back nothing because there's nothing there. But even if there is, even if you do have it as searchable or if it's a full digitally born document, the next is that there's no tags or structure to it at all. Without those, a screen reader doesn't know what a heading is. It doesn't know what a paragraph or a table is. You have to make that determination. And third is missing alt text, where every image, chart, and graph that is trying to convey something to a non-sighted user, they need to understand what that is in context of the document. And the vast majority of charts that you'll see on PDFs, even if they do have alt text, it'll be something that, saying chart or image, nothing rather descriptive. The other 2 kind of compound the problem where, tables and lists are kind of the bane of remediators' existence in many respects, because every cell, every list item, every field needs to be structured and set up in the way that the relationships are being conveyed properly for the screen reader. And then you have your document metadata, like your document title. Is it describing what that document actually is? The language that's being set, the PDF UA settings. Most documents just don't have these things set at all, and all of these kind of compound on one another and triggers this slow, expensive, and manual process, which is what the next slide really is about, is kind of giving you an understanding of what is this process that you have to do to meet, Section 508, 504, ADA Title II, these regulations. And when you look at it, in a broader respect, every competitor in this market is more or less selling some version of helping you do this 6-step process faster. The first one is, step 1 is OCR, right? So if the document is a scan, it has no text layer, none of the rest of the steps will matter. You can't tag what you can't read. So you have to make sure that you have the text layer embedded onto this. If these are poor quality scans, you need to make sure that you have a good enough engine to be able to do that. And that's where we start. We started on performing on some of the worst quality scans where if you were to try and put it in like Adobe's OCR, it would just crash on these types of poor quality documents, because we knew that that is where a lot of customers' documents, that is their real world. Step 2 is tagging. That's the actual tagging, accessibility tags. You may have heard that before. And the way I like to think about it is that every PDF is kind of like a puzzle. But the difference with this puzzle, you don't get a box of pieces. You have to first create these puzzle pieces. So this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a table, this is an image. Then you have to put those pieces together in that right order. And that's what step 3 is. That is the reading order, where an easy way of looking at it is a multi-column newspaper is going to read differently than a meeting agenda in the way you literally read it, right? Step 4 is your alt text, where for every image, chart, and graph that is meant to convey something on that document, you need to make sure that you are describing that with enough context so that that non-sighted user is able to understand what that is trying to convey. Step 5 is you have to make sure all of your tables, your lists, your form fields, that all of those are captured correctly. If you have tables that are grid lists or with multi-column headers or elements like embedded lists and table cells, you need to make sure all of those are being tagged properly so that the screen reader is able to establish those relationships. And as you're doing these steps, you're kind of going through a loop of validating and retesting to say, am I making this more accessible? And the architecture decision that makes us different is that most tools, they're trying to make a remediator more efficient at each of these steps. Better tooling for the actual remediation specialist. Where some of the overlay types of products are just throwing these at a large language model and putting them to an HTML. The problem with, as I'm sure you all have heard of with generators, is that can hallucinate. Your descriptions get invented. They're not conveying or not being something that is deterministic or reliable. We took a bit of a different path where we looked at every step on this process, and we kind of asked, can this be done computationally? Utilizing things like OCR, deterministic methods, and for identifying tags, for establishing reading orders, for creating your table structures. Is that something that we're able to set up computationally and then utilize generative AI for that polish, for those areas where we are able to enrich what it is that we're actually doing? And when you look at this 6-step process today, the average time it will take to process, a document, even just on a per page, can be 5 to 10 minutes or more. That's kind of an industry standard perspective. And all of these things add up the larger your documents are. What most tools try to do is they try to make a certain part of this process more efficient or more effective, or try to automate this part of it. What we took with our approach is automating 100% of this process and using computational deterministic methods where it needs to be for that predictability, but utilizing AI or generative AI where it's most useful for things like contextual alt text, and that those polishings where we're able to utilize it for the best of its strengths and abilities. And that's really where our approach to this is fundamentally different from what everybody else is doing, because the bottom line is that manual remediation in any form, it does not scale. And if you go to the next slide, Doug, just to kind of, and on the bottom there, it says do some math, where if you're spending even a minute or 5 minutes on a page, just add that up across a couple hundred pages, you're talking dozens of hours for a single document. And that's why you're seeing this process. You're seeing some of the numbers you've heard about where, it could take $10, $15 a page to do that, because it's a very slow process. That page per time estimate is not my estimate. That is an industry, accepted standard for using something like Adobe. Some tools that try to make a remediator more efficient are trying to lower that amount of saying, oh, well, it'll only take 5 minutes per page with our tool. But the math does not add up when you look at these large types of archives, and that's what leads to it being so expensive. That's why it starts at $5 a page, and it can go for very complex fillable forms that have dozens of fields on a page. It could be $100 or more a page for those, because it requires experienced remediators to know how to remediate these documents effectively. And the issue is that at scale is where this becomes more of a problem, is that there's inconsistency naturally in the way that we operate, meaning us as not just remediators, but people in general, where I can have a 20-year remediation expert. If I give them 10 PDFs, I'm sure PDF 1 will look rather similar to PDF 9 in terms of the approach and quality of the tags and what was done. But if I give that same remediator 10,000 PDFs, I guarantee you that PDF 1 will look different than PDF 5,850. It's just how we operate when you look at the scale of this. And that's why you see some of the error rates you're seeing that are industry accepted, is because we're not able to do this at the level that's needed. And it's why it's such an unmanageable problem. And you hear Adobe admitting that there are trillions of PDFs out there. And for just any sizable agency, you're talking millions of pages. it does not work without automation. And that's the approach that we really took from it, is that automation was needed to break this bottleneck, but we needed to do it in a way that was computational, as well as really addressing the problem and automating 100% of that process. So I'm going to pass it over to Bobby just to go a little bit more on that approach.
Thanks, RJ. I think the ethos of what he talked about was ultimately how do we produce really three outcomes, which is we can do volume, we can do it at an economical price, and we don't fall off on accuracy. And I think that's the three challenges. So automation is really the mechanisms we all know, if done properly, can achieve those results. It's a very tough problem with accessibility because there is, as RJ mentioned, in a professional remediator, there is subjectivity. One person's interpretation of a reading order may be a little different than the other, so you have to add objectivity to it. So when we developed accessibility on demand, that was its goal. First and foremost, automation, that we have to look at every layer of that stack going through the life cycle of remediation and making sure that we can deterministically create an outcome that was of high level, and then together collectively can produce the results, and then layer generative AI, which I think is a good thing if done properly, to be able to tune it, or as RJ mentioned, polish it. So it accomplishes lower cost, large batches or individual files. It can do it consistently, meaning that you don't have the error rates because you don't have to have that iterative process that's done from reviewing outcomes, having it off, and then going back and finding out what to do. It reduces that. So you then have the ability to meet compliance. And so ultimately, as we look at those standards, as was mentioned, WCAG 2.1 AA and the PDF UA, depending on which one of those mandates that you're talking about, whether it's 508, whether it's ADA Title II or 504, or the broader international requirements that also fall within those two scopes, which is the PDF UA and the ADA Title II, we have to be able to achieve that and check all those boxes, because from an auditor standpoint, if you're going in and taking a look at it, there's really two things that ultimately have to be achieved. The most important one, which we'll talk about a little bit further down the road when you see the demonstration, is really all about the things that RJ talked about. Was we have to make sure that it's the right tags. We have to make sure it's in the right order, and we have to make sure that the alternative text is contextual. That's ultimately what's the responsibility or the mission for the visually impaired individual. On the other side, we also have to meet the requirements of a auditor, which is we're checking, and making sure that the scoring of that effort was quite high. And so we focus on that as well to ensure that technically this document can pass those checks. And finally, if there is the need to do some remediation, that the user doesn't need to be highly trained to do that, which the industry average, it takes about 2 years for a professional remediator to become productive. We need to reduce that to hours. And so really, how do we fit within sort of the market? And I think, again, which was talked about, when you think about a competitive framework, I'd always like to say that when I architected the solution, I wasn't really thinking about being competitive. I was thinking about how do you solve the problem. And I think the market had been approaching the problem was, we know that at the end of the day, there's a whole market of people that are professional remediators. We just need to give them better tools. And I think some fantastic tools out there, and I think they're highlighted here, and they're segmented into a couple of different categories, where there are really monitoring tools, which is at the top of here, things that tell you have some problems, to the next layer, which is the big man on campus, which is Adobe. They build tools within, obviously, Adobe to be able to Adobe Pro, so that way, if an individual needs to do it, there is the ability to do it. But it's quite complex, and anybody here who's ever tried it pretty much says, please have somebody else do this for me. I mean, it really is that difficult unless you have experience. But they do provide it, and that's a good thing. And then, of course, there's been the incubation of I would say, competitors to Adobe to make it easier for those professional remediators to do it faster. And so there's an uplift there. And where we decoupled from that whole strategy, it's not about, designing a tool for professional remediators. It's about solving the problem of that you should be able to close your eyes and a document is done by just pressing a button. If we had our druthers, that's what our outcome would be. But ultimately, the goal is to achieve that at that high level. So that's what AOD is about, is fully automating 100% of that tech stack to produce a high accuracy outcome. And of course, by default, cost and time go down dramatically. So what does that mean, really? How do we approach it? And this is really about, again, the cost. But if you look at this chart, we're really talking about there are an analysis of the documents that are being processed. And we looked at it from the perspective of how do we optimize that. If you look at the center lane there, what's called level 2 enhanced, the business was, or the application was built around really as complex of a document as you possibly can do. And our first introduction of AOD really focused on, it really didn't matter what you threw at the application. It was to assess it and make sure it can actually produce a result. It came at a cost, I think a really effective and good one. But what we found is as we got more and more documents, there were two other ends of the spectrum where there were ones that were more simplistic, which is we call level 1, is that they were very text heavy. And we wanted to find how do we drive the economies even more and more. And we found a subset of those documents, and they tend to be some of the big batch opportunities or older documents that you can do. Legacy documents are very text heavy. That was level 1. And then of course there are opportunities or cases, I should call, or edge cases that are extremely complex that even level 2 can't do. And it does require that a professional, well, I wouldn't even say a professional, but someone had to review it and edit it. And our level 3 is if you don't have internal staff, because you can do it now with our tool because it's easy, but don't have that staff, then level 3 was reserved for, hey, we can't do it. You push it off to us to do. So those were the 3 levels where, again, level 2 was the strike zone of it to get that price point under $2, which was about an 80% reduction in sort of the current market rate. And then massively lower with opportunities when we see these big batches of text-heavy documents.
Well, and I think if you don't mind, I'll just add one thing here. We've been doing 508 compliance for quite a few years, and the challenge is most of the organizations we work with are looking to use US-based resources. They want to make sure that there's privacy and there's other protections in place. And the only way to get these costs lower than what are published as market price was to essentially, outsource it to third world countries and not know exactly who is doing what or the quality and having all the associated risk. So that is if you see prices that are even coming close to approaching, anything below this market price, that's usually the compromises that are being made.
Yeah, and I would say, Doug, that price is also on very low complex documents. You'll still see, even when you try to offshore that, and we saw that right away, it will go back right up there to very complex documents. Still cost effective, but the price goes up. And so, I think, what does this ultimately matter, like in real world, right? What's in practice? What does it mean? I'll give this a great example. It was one of our first federal customers that, really we were very collaborative with them and gave us some nice feedback. But they had a challenge. They were being faced with a particular batch of documents. I think it was 900 documents, about 25,000 pages, that they were under pressure to make them, and they had a very short window to make them accessible. So they put it out on the street to find out what it was going to cost them. And they were getting bids anywhere back from 250,000 to 400,000, and you can just imagine, it had to be done like within a week or two. I can't remember, but it was very short time frame. And so we presented what we were doing to them because it was automation first. And ultimately, we were able to do this for them for a price of around $20,000, and we delivered it back in less than 24 hours. Today, that batch can be done within hours, but back then it was a day because we were doing some tuning and things like that. But that's the scale, and that's the opportunity ahead. That when we're talking about the scale of what folks are facing, especially with the mandates that things have to be done by a certain timeline. there really isn't any other way to do the big backlogs. You know, a great example. We're talking to a customer that needs 86 million pages done in 10 months. I mean, I don't really see how that's humanly possible with every remediator in the world attacking the problem. But, you know, that's the kind of scale that we're talking about.
So with that being said, I think it's time to show off what the solution looks like. So RJ, if you be so kind.
Thanks, Doug. Absolutely. Let me know when you're able to see my screen. Yeah, let's see it. Great. Fantastic. So this is the self-service portal for accessibility on demand, or you'll hear us refer to it shorthand as AOD. What the view you're looking at here is what we refer to as the document grid. And what you'll notice about AOD is that the overall way in which you remediate a PDF end to end, it's not just that automation first approach in terms of how we remediate and 100% of that process, but also in how you use the application. We're all about minimizing clicks and making sure that it's as seamless as possible and that you don't need to be an expert in order to use this. And that starts with this document grid, where all functionality I'm about to go over is 1 or 2 clicks away from this grid. And that's just by design, where each row in this grid corresponds to a batch. Now, a batch could have 1 PDF, or a batch could have 100 or 1,000 in theory, but we remediate in batches. And the way the grid is structured from left to right is you'll have for each row, you'll have the batch as well as the document name. If you click to expand it, you'll see the number of pages and documents across the batch, as well as the current level of remediation applied and what it could be upgraded to. You have the upload and last process date, the status, and then the 2 compliance scores and standards that we baseline against, which are WCAG 2.1 AA and PDF UA. To remediate documents, all you have to do first is create a batch. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to click on Create Batch. I'm going to give it a name and description, brief description. I'm going to drop in a couple of PDFs here, and I'm going to click on Create. Now, this isn't remediating them. This is indexing them into the system. But what you'll notice is I didn't have to do any pre-processing for these documents. Some of these PDFs are going to be pure machine-born PDFs that don't have any tags applied to them. Some of these documents are going to be simple text-based documents, and some of them are going to be really poor quality scans where it'll be hard for you or I to even read them. But the point of this create batch functionality is that you don't have to do any pre-processing. And though all of these files were quite small, we don't have a limit to how large a PDFs you're able to remediate. So if you have a 50, 100 meg, a gigabyte size PDF, you're still able to just drop them in and click on create, and it'll index them into the grid. You'll see that they're populated here at the top. I can expand to now see these documents. And now I want to remediate them. So as Bobby mentioned, we have different levels of remediation, and you could apply these across the entire batch. So I can select upgrade for the entire batch, or I can change individual documents to another level. It's just based upon the characteristics of the document. So like, for example, if I click on this preview icon here, you'll see this document where this is a text-based document. There's no complex structures in reading order or complex visuals or charts for me to understand on that document. Whereas on a document like this, that is a housing market overview document, there are more complex tables, charts, and graphs that can use or would benefit from more detailed contextual alt text, or a document like this that is a poor quality scan that has some of those characteristics of multi-column layouts where the reader needs to be told that you need to start at the top left here, go all the way down to this end of this first column, to go up top here to this second and down and so on. This is what level 2 is really built for, are for instances like this where I can benefit from having deeper, more contextual alt text, as well as able to handle more complex structures. To give you like an understanding of distribution at this point, because we have a couple hundred organizations on the platform, 95% of our customers, or 99, I should say, percent of our customers run their documents on levels 1 or 2. That level 3 option is really for those two types of documents that either we currently don't handle in levels 1 or 2, which right now are fillable forms. We do require those right now to be run at level 3. We do have that on our roadmap for this quarter, but it is still a level 3 currently, or it's a policy-driven document, where regardless of whatever technology you have, by policy, I need someone to look at every single page of this document. Now, I'll show you a little later on in the demonstration, if you do have those types of policy-driven documents, we do give you access to the same ability as our remediators when you choose level 3 to review every single page. But we're going to select these levels of 1 and 2 across this batch. I'm going to select the batch I want to process, and I can process any number of batches at once. It doesn't have to be one at a time. And I'm going to go here to make accessible. And here is where it'll give me an estimate of the number of credits that'll be required for me to process these 4 documents. And this is where, a key point that Bobby touched on a bit before in terms of these different levels. But a key part of how AOD we operate is that we don't have license fees, we don't have platform fees, we don't have any limitation to how many users you can have for your organization or your customer's organization, how many teams your customer can create for their organization, or how many admins that you can have to oversee those two things. Everything comes back to a credit, where we're a credit-based, outcome-based system, where level 1 is 1 credit a page, level 2 with the compliance score guarantee of 95% is 6 credits a page, and level 3, which has that remediator in the loop for policy-driven documents, is 40 credits a page. So that's how you see the 30 cents, $1.80, and 12 is the 1 credit, 6 credit, and 40. If you're okay with this estimate, you're just going to click on Make Accessible. Now this will start the remediation engine, where what you'll notice is all of these documents will go into queue at the exact same time. And that's because we remediate asynchronously. So you see they're going into queue here. And what that means is, regardless, there's only 4 PDFs in this batch. Let's say there was 400. The amount of time it will take to process all 400 or all 4 of these PDFs, or however many PDFs are in a batch, will roughly equate to how long it takes to process the longest or most complex in that particular batch. This was, from one of our first customers, as Bobby mentioned, was that federal agency where they had those 25,000 scanned pages. It's not like everybody, would have that same exact scenario. But if you do have those types of backlogs, there is no other mechanism that we're aware of other than AOD that's able to handle that type of volume just at a click of a button. And it's because we do things asynchronously that enables it. So you'll see these go into processing as resources free up. And they should, within the next couple of minutes, we should see all of these completed. But what we're fundamentally waiting for is for this status to populate green, meaning that yes, it was correct, or rather it was remediated. And then we want to pull back the score. So I'm going to select whichever document that has been remediated, and I'm going to click on here the Generate Accessibility Score. Now, I know I mentioned at the beginning of the demonstration, we're all about minimizing clicks. This is an extra step right now that we do have, but it's because of how we approach our compliance score and what they mean. But you'll just see that when the scores come back, they are color-coded. If they're above 95%, they'll be in green. If they're below 95%, they'll be in red. If you process your documents at level 2 and they don't score above that 95%, no credits will be deducted. There's not anything that you have to do for that. But if I click on any one of these scores, it will bring up our compliance modal. Now, if I clicked on the WCAG score, so it went to the WCAG tab. If I clicked on the other score, it would go to the PDF UA. But this is our compliance modal, where you'll see that this document was 13 pages. There were 533 tags that were applied across those 13 pages. And for PDF UA, there were 8,190 tag checks that were done for PDF UA for this one 13-page document. For WCAG, there was a little over 8,500 tag checks that were done. So about 16 to 17,000 compliance checks done for this one 13-page document. And you can see for each of the standards how they're broken down into their subcategories and their past warnings and fails. Now, every PDF that you remediate in AOD, you get a certificate with it. So you could preview it here by clicking this button. It'll bring up the certificate for this individual document. The certificate is 2 pages, where the first page gives some metadata around the number of tags, what level was ran at, the title, as well as the past warnings and fail breakdowns for each of those scores. But the second page is, in my opinion, more important. And it's because it breaks down our methodology and a bit of how we're approaching compliance scores and what these even mean. Where a key point here is that we do not home grow our checks and our scores. We partner with Axis 4, that's AXES4, and we use their Pack Checker API to get back every single one of these compliance checks. We pay per page for that, but the reason why we do it is because what our compliance score percentage is, it's simply how many tag checks were done for the given standard, so how many PDF UA checks were done, minus how many PDF UA checks failed, divided by the total number of PDF UA checks. That's what our PDF UA compliance score percentage is. And the same concept applies for WCAG. The reason why we approach it in this way is because if, you know, the thing that most are doing this process for to meet the deadlines is that they do not want to have a lawsuit levied against them. They do not want, to get audited. But if you do get audited, your auditor is not going to use Adobe's 32-point checker to determine is this PDF accessible or not. They're going to use third-party compliance, industry standard tools to make those determinations. Axis 4 is one of those third-party compliance providers that is just well known in the industry. This Pack Checker API is something that we pay per page for, because this certificate is meant to be for every PDF as a form of provenance of, well, what was done on this document? What is the methodology that you followed? And that you can show this for every PDF that you remediate here. So I don't have to download this individually for any documents that have been completed. And you'll see 3 of those 4 have now been completed, where the scanned one, which is the most complex, is still processing, but it should be done here shortly. But whenever any documents have been completed and you want to download them out of the system, you just simply select, go here to download batch, and that will put into one folder the remediated PDF. It will append _AOD to the file name so you can delineate, as well as the compliance score certificate PDF, so 2 separate, and they'll compile them into one folder. You don't have to do it one at a time. And for 80% of our customers, what I just showed you, that is their journey in AOD. That is their process of, they have PDFs, they create a batch, they drop in their documents, they select their level. If the score comes back at a level that is good enough for them, they simply download it out of the system and they finish their end-to-end process, whether it be upload to the site, sent to their customer, etc. For some of our customers, they want to review what was done. And they want to see, well, like on this example of this document, you'll see that it's 100% on PDF UA, but it's 99.81% on WCAG, right? So in the compliance modal, you'll see here that for WCAG, there were 8,515 compliance checks that passed, but there were 16 that failed, right? So naturally, where customers go to, well, what are those 16 that failed? And what you'll notice here is that of the 16, 14 of them are under the distinguishable subcategory of the perceivable category, and the other 2 are under navigable. But the point was, so only these 16 are under these 2 buckets. But the point is that we had customers that wanted to review what was done, and some that would say they want the ability to make changes to that document, but they don't want to have to be experts in order to do it. And if you've ever used Adobe to remediate a PDF, you'll find out very quickly how complicated it could be just to add an element to an existing P tag. We wanted to recreate that experience for those customers that do want that ability to go into that review and make changes. So we got creative with what that looked like, but we didn't get creative with the name. It's just called the review modal. And you could access it from an individual document by clicking on Open and Review, or for any documents that have been completed, I can select those documents across any number of batches, and I can click on Review here. It'll bring me to the same place. I'm going to go back to that document so we can finish it from that path and explain the review modal from that perspective. But just to show you that you can also get to the review modal from the grid if you have multiple documents that you want to review. So I'm going to click on Open and Review, and this is the review modal. I'm going to expand this to make this full screen. And the review modal is 3 sections. Section 1 is the tag tree. Section 2 is the document preview. And Section 3 is the properties and checker tabs. Where, starting with the tag tree on the left, what you'll see is that if I expand any one of the pages, you'll see that it'll identify in the preview section what tags were identified, the reading order in which they were identified, and their bounding boxes in terms of their locations. And I have this for every single page. But if I click on to any one individual tag here, you'll see that I'm able to change the properties for that tag very easily as well. Like, for example, the first element in the reading order for this page, it identified was this heading, which it identified as a heading 2, which I would agree with. However, you may have a customer that wants a methodology where, no, I want H1 tags on every page for navigation purposes on every single page. So I want to change this to a heading 1. I'm going to click on the tag, go to the properties for tag type, change this to an H1, and that's it. I don't have to click save after every change that I make. I make as many changes as I want on the document. I only need to save once at the very end. If I try and exit, it'll prompt me just to make sure that I'm still staying within these boundaries and that I'm not losing any progress. But it's as easy as for you to change the tag type, as easy as I just showed you there. The reading order, if you want to adjust that, it's as simple as clicking and dragging and moving up or down. It already applies this in the reading order in which it's identified, but you can make those changes by simply dragging or moving. What you'll notice for tags like this figure, which is a graph, right? We ran this document at level 2. Level 2 has much deeper contextual alt text, or that description of that image. So when I click on this figure, it'll highlight the chart, and figures, they have as their property alt text. And you'll see here on the right-hand side, the alternate text that was generated for this individual chart. I can listen to how a screen reader sounds when they're reading this by clicking on this button. I'm not sure, Doug, if you can hear this, but
Bar chart titled number of closed sales displaying monthly.
But you could at least get that feedback of what that sounds like when it's reading it. And you'll see here the contextual part of followed by a modest recovery to about 1600. This is what this particular chart is trying to say in context to this overall document, which is a housing market overview document. Now, this is about a paragraph of text. I could probably write this text in about 3 to 5 minutes. If I saw this, I could probably come up with this alt text in a couple of minutes. A really good remediator could probably do it in a minute or two, right? The problem becomes is there are 35 of these types of charts across this one 13-page document. These are the things that add up when you start looking this in the broader context. And these are the things that we do automatically. I want to show on an example of reading order another document that's a better example of this. Where, yes, perfect. Where this is a multi-page, or excuse me, multi-column page, where cited users, we know when we're looking at this page, oh, well, obviously, if I'm reading this to somebody, I'm starting at the top left, and I'm reading all the way down here to the bottom before going to the top right, and then all the way down here before I go to the next page, right? A reader does not know that. You need to structure these tags and the order in which they're being placed from top to bottom in the way that it needs to be reflected here. This is where level 2 also comes in, is able to handle these types of complexities, where if I start with the first tag, you'll see it identifies this as a heading 2. It'll keep going down, identifying these sub-elements and these particular tags. Clicking through this list. I always like to show this because lists and tables from a remediator's perspective are some of the most annoying to tag in Adobe because it's very cumbersome, requires a lot of clicks in order for you to do things. But lists and tables also have very specific requirements where this particular list has 7 items noted by these bullet points, right? So there needs to be 7 list items here for each one of these bullet points. But let me go to the third list item. where this is something you or I, right, sighted users, we know this automatically, that if I'm reading out this list to somebody, when I get to the third bullet point, I automatically know that these two lines of construct ring dikes around boils on levee back slopes, levee toes, or behind levees. The third item, the third bullet point, needs to correspond to these two lines of text. And again, this is stuff you would have to do manually in Adobe for every single list and item and table that you find. We do these things automatically for you because this is where we really make those differences in the tagging quality, where a checker is not able to understand this nuance. A checker is just looking for a tag, and if it sees a list tag there, okay, yeah, that looks okay. But it's not able to understand the nuance of this. Only when you give it to an end user and you don't have this type of hierarchy that it just sounds like a flat list that a user ends up coming back and complaining. You'll see that we do these things automatically. And this paragraph, this is another concept of a logical group that, again, we do automatically, where we automatically know when we look at these 6 lines together, this is one group of text that I should read to somebody as one section, right? That's why it's a paragraph. A screen reader doesn't know that. You need to tell it that these 6 lines are all part of one paragraph. They're all part of one puzzle piece. What a lot of tools that especially say that they're automated tagging tools do is each one of these lines would be its own tag. And again, only an end user would realize that, hey, that it'll say P tag at the end of every single one of these lines. So we do that automatically so that the user does not, is able to get that better experience. As I keep going down here, you'll see that this next tag should go up to the top right, which you'll see that it does. So it inherits and keeps that reading order. So these are some of the things that we do automatically, even on some of your more complex scenarios. Going back to that document with the failed checks, just to show you the checker tab, where we only show you what are remaining issues anymore. We don't show you what passed because there's just too many at this point. The red X means a fail. The caution sign means a warning. But what you'll find is if there are remaining fails, especially ones in WCAG, they will fall under the same types of subcategories that you can expand, click on, and it'll go to the corresponding tag where it says that fail exists. But you'll often find in this scenario, it's saying text with insufficient contrast. This is a black text on a white background. This is not an actual fail as it relates from a check. This is just something where the algorithmic checker is not able to understand this nuance. So this is something that a remediator would know, oh, this isn't actually a fail. So I'm going to pause here because that is the end-to-end of AOD, from creating a document, uploading, processing your batch, getting the scores back, download, or review. And Doug, I will pass it back to you.
Perfect. Yeah, that was fantastic. And
Doug,
as
let me just layer one last thing, because I think, and RJ, thank you, because I think you did a really good job of showing sort of how the solution works. And I always at the beginning, and Doug, I can hand off to you. We had an objective, right? That at the beginning here is, we talk about remediation has a scale issue, right? It's cost, it's time, and it requires, a lot of revisions because of the efficiency of doing it, and hence expands both those two problems. I hope you saw within the tool that even though RJ went through all these different elements to show you what someone can do, it also showed you in the very beginning that 80% of our customers, actually more than that now, they just hit those buttons: upload, make accessible, download. And that is the opportunity for massive scale. And then in the opportunities where somebody needs to by policy review, or they just want to go through and do those things, or do those make adjustments, we have a tool that also drives a ton of efficiency. Some of the things that he showed you that he did manually in the review, if you use the tools that are designed to drive those efficiently, are designed for professional remediators. And what he showed you was somebody that can be trained within an hour, hour and a half, something like that, can do those things and complete the job. Again, accelerating the time to getting something done. So I just want to leave you with that from the demo. I think that's the goal here: speed, accuracy, and time.
Yeah, that's perfect. And again, RJ, thank you for the demo. That was great. We hope that you learn that, PDF accessibility, it benefits everyone, but it's also required through legislation. That AI does deliver, fast, scalable, trustworthy results. That in this context, it's very, very badly needed and provides real benefits, and that you'll achieve better outcomes, and lower your costs by using a solution such as AOD. So we're here to help you apply these strategies in your organization. What we want to do is encourage you to, book your free, no obligation trial and run, a test using your own documents. But I'd like to transition to just a brief Q&A time where we can just have a conversation about the questions that were asked, or the questions you may have, and please keep them coming. I know Clementine asked one that you may not have saw. Is there ability to integrate with an existing system versus downloading or uploading the files?
Yeah, I mean, I can take that since, I'm the architect of the solution. So we are real close. It's definitely scheduled for the end of January, really, June release was an API. And that would allow it to integrate with any, either document processing solution or document management solution and or CMS solution. So we see the initial demand was obviously because of the public facing documents on their websites, the need for when somebody hit the publish button, it automatically made the document accessible before it pushed it up, and that way it was fully automated. So the API will allow for that use case as well as in-process document workflows. You can just plug it in. So it's going into pilot at the end of this week, and then full release is scheduled for the end of January. I keep saying that, end of June.
I was going to say, you said January. I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure it's right around the corner.
Yeah.
So in June, and
yeah.
Some potentially valid use cases would be, directly integrated with SharePoint or any other system that connects with APIs.
Right.
Heather had asked a question. She works at an agency that produces construction plans. Have you guys done anything with construction plans or tested to see how well it works?
Hard answer, because have we done engineering drawings? And the answer is yes. It has processed engineering drawings. I don't know. I want to say it's been successful, but I think, this is great for you to trial this against your use case, because I don't know the sort of the complexity of what you have. But I'm going to give you, I don't know why this is the case, but apparently all the engineering firms in Hawaii use our solution as their default. But I think they probably use it and then in the review mode will make adjustments, because I just don't believe, because of the complexity or the breadth and the size of those documents, that that it hits everything that you might want to think of, because there are very specific things obviously in those drawings, but they seem to be quite happy with it. So I would just suggest, contact Doug and under trial, test some of your drawings.
So we're getting close to the end. Please ask a few more questions if you have them. I know the one thing that we run into is how does a customer decide level 1 or 2, and what happens if they guess wrong?
You want to take that, RJ?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's a fantastic question of levels 1 or 2, where there is a kind of threshold we found, normally around 1,000 PDFs, where it becomes more of an effort for a customer to figure out, is this a level 1 or a level 2, than just running them all at level 2, because they have that compliance score guarantee. However, on the other side, we do have some customers, and you have that ability of running it at level 1 and then upgrading to level 2. If you want that extra, you're just paying the marginal difference in credits. But there is that threshold there where even making that determination, depending on how many you have, that could be an exercise unto itself. But you do have that option in either scenario of, if you want to run it at level 1 and feel this needs a bit more, you can upgrade to level 2, and you're just paying the marginal difference in those 5 credits.
Perfect. And just to clarify, the solution is really designed to have the customer bias towards level 2. If they've got very straightforward, simple documents, they may consider level 1. And if edge cases where there's either a challenge, maybe engineering drawings would be a good example, or there is, although that may be a special requirements just because of the complexity of having the expertise to do the tagging. But the, or there's some sort of legislative reason, or maybe a very high profile document that for whatever reason you wanted to be manually remediated.
Exactly, for level 3, and you don't have internal staff. That's why we give you the review modal. The whole idea of the review modal is you don't have to spend that if you have internal staff that can do it, because it doesn't require professional experience. We can train for that, and that way your folks can do it very, very quickly and not have to have that uplift of doing something level 3. You could do it internally. That's why we have very few, such a small percentage that anybody needs the level 3 from us. It's just they don't have the internal staff and the volume's too high for them to do it. But it's very, like, it's 1% of the use case for us. But that review modal is the exact same thing that we're using to get it done. You can do it yourself, and that's what that was the design goal.
Yeah, that makes it nice. And I think the other thing that stands out to me is you do provide guidance that essentially, there's objective and subjective criteria related to 508 compliance, and you use a third party to validate that it's exceeded 95%, where it's essentially passed, and that's the kind of assurance that an agency needs to be able to move forward. And I think that's helpful as well. So we're committed to not going over time. Any last minute questions? Otherwise, we're going to call this a day and encourage you to reach out. But thank you, everybody. We look forward to engaging you on your project and letting you test this out on your own documents. Heather, if you've got some documents you want to try this on, just let me know. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, everyone.